Hey, Phil. It's John McConnin here today. I'm an attorney and a broker. Phil is a realtor, sold over 300 homes. I think maybe more than 400, he can tell you. And today we're going to talk about buyer compensation, when it's allowed, in my opinion, as a lawyer, when sellers should be considering it, and why frankly, I can't believe what I'm reading from industry sources. I'm like, they just lost $1.8 billion and they're still at it. I mean, don't they learn? So that's sort of the I think there's going to be instructive for realtors who care about their clients' assets and brokers who care about their future of their business, and why they need to take a second thought about the difference between a settlement and the idea that your practices that you were doing are now okay. So, Phil,
right. I think this is going to be a great video, John, because there's so much misinformation when you read the comments and the videos that people are making out there, realtors, real estate industry people. So I really look forward to hearing your perspective as an attorney. And I think you've got a great article. Start with that Housing Wire one.
And I'm going to get to that in a second. I just need to explain my biases here. Yes, I'm a lawyer. I have always thought in plenty of parts of real estate, realtors should have been sharing their fees to protect their clients, to have lawyers involved. And I think because they didn't, all these conflicts have come up and they weren't protected, and they've lost hundreds of millions of dollars for it. And so part of me says realtors need to stop practicing law without a license. Realtors even need to stop giving opinions on this stuff because it's tricky. And then finally, in the end, we have to protect our clients' assets. And I don't see enough of that. I mean, I saw crazy interviews with the NAR president where someone was saying, well, we can just adjust these things later because contracts are made to be amended, and we can offer buyer co-op, on the listing contract, we can negotiate buyer co-op because because now we're protected by the settlement. And the NAR president, not to his credit, said, well, I'm not a lawyer here. No, the NAR president should have said, you shouldn't do that unless you have a lawyer who understands this advising you to do so. He can't just say, I'm not a lawyer here. He's the head of NAR, and he needs to be straightening these things out. Because I think that a realtor who puts co-op on the listing agreement and then markets on mass media, social media, could be getting his sellers in trouble too for steering. And we're going to get into that today. But right now, let's start with, I'm sorry, I'm fired up. Frankly, I cannot believe how irresponsible realtors are right now. I cannot believe it. They have to be putting their sellers' interests at first. In fact, Phil, let me just bring this point out. We have been able to practice the buying and selling of real estate, and sellers have felt secure in the practice because the theory of title is title transfers. All you really get is title and a couple other covenants. And as long as I disclose it properly, that deal's done. It's over. You should have caught it during your walkthrough or beforehand, because unless we were lying, this deal's done. And we've had very few lawsuits after the fact, except for over material issues that weren't disclosed.
Right.
What realtors are doing now, by possibly steering and doing things that are now called unethical, illegal, and have resulted in $1.8 billion verdicts, if they're going to continue those practices as the agent for the seller, the sellers are going to be held responsible for this too. And if they continue with these practices going forward, they've now potentially opened up post-closing lawsuits forever from entrepreneurial lawyers, not just the class action lawyers, but any lawyer who finds a disgruntled plaintiff and says, I'm not happy with my purchase. The market crashed. I found problems with the house after. I should have known they were disclosed, but I didn't realize how bad it was. And then the lawyer's going to say, did they offer compensation on homes.com? Did they offer compensation on Zillow? Did they offer compensation on their own website? Did they pre-negotiate compensation on their listing agreement? I can't wait to get that in discovery. And they're going to just rip sellers apart. I mean, where are these realtors? And the thing that kills me is this was Keller Williams. They were the ones who got hammered from hundreds of millions of dollars, I believe. So I'm going to read this quote from Keller Williams, and we're going to go forward from there. I mean, I'm so fired up. I apologize to the audience for being fired up, but it to me, and I liked Keller. I still do like Keller Williams. They have great training. I learned a lot from them, but this is totally irresponsible, if you ask me, in my legal opinion. And I could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying, in my legal opinion, this is really risking things for sellers going forward. So let me see if I can. Are you seeing this Keller Williams thing right here? I'm spinning.
Yes. Yep. You've got the screen right.
All right. So they Keller Williams talked about, don't worry, cooperative compensation is still legal. I think that's true. It depends on how, when, and ideally, as the Department of Justice said, the listing agent and the seller talk about the listing agent's compensation, and the buyer agent talk about buyer agent compensation. That's the ideal model. That's the model DOJ's been pushing. Anything short of that model has to be examined for its legality, in my opinion. So let's look at what they said there. They said, and this was another good point, seller concession is money that is being given by the seller directly to the buyer. Correct. Papazan said, I think he's the president or the CEO of Keller Williams. The buyer can use these funds for anything they would like, including paying their agent if they choose. That is probably also true because in America, it's still contracts. And frankly, I do resent the other part of this is I do resent the federal government telling us what to do about contracts when really this should be turned more by state law than federal law. If you understand who has the right to control property within the state, it's the state, not the federal government. So I understand that too. Like, and the seller should be able to have the ability to sell their home for top dollar and do what they'd like, as long as they're not breaking the law. So the buyer can use those funds for anything they would like, including paying their agent if they choose. I think that's a true statement. The question is, could a listing agent write into the remarks, seller is willing to give a concession of 2% for buyer agent fees? Like, I think that's an open question right now, and it could be unethical or illegal based on what the DOJ was saying, not just on the settlement, because even if all future lawsuits will be barred in federal court for 7 years, that does not mean the state courts are going to have to follow it necessarily. I think that's a much more challenging issue, and I think there's very few lawyers in the country that would give you a definitive answer on that after I've done a lot of reading and research on it and remembering back what I learned about in law school. So additionally, the panel noted, while agents will no longer be allowed to advertise offers of cooperative compensation in the MLS, that means they're no longer being able to say, we're going to give 2% to the buyer's agents or 1% or a flat fee. They can do so on their own websites, in social media posts and emails, and any other way they might typically market a property. Cooperative compensation offers can be and should be, if the client wishes, included in purchase agreements. Okay. I think that last statement is true and would be in line with the DOJ's wishes. But this is I'm being a lawyer. This is the most amazing statement from Keller Williams I could possibly imagine. And I wonder what lawyers told them to say it, because I don't get it. They can also do so on their own website and social media posts and emails and in other ways they might typically market a property.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in real quick and just say for the people at home. So the settlement bans us. They're going to actually remove the field that would allow us to advertise compensation of 2%, 3% to the cooperating realtor, the buyer's agent. We're no longer allowed to do that per the settlement. And what John's pointing out is that Keller Williams is saying on your own website, on my website, I could still offer that compensation.
Or Zillow or homes.com, any of the national websites. And if they're right, well, then there's going to be a race to create, and I'll do it with a twist. If they were right, I would already be starting that website, and I'd be making cooperative offers of cooperative compensation in a way that I thought was the most possible legally, the safest way for sellers to do it. But I don't believe anyone can offer that safety to sellers right now, because they could be steering, and steering is illegal. I've shown that in other videos, and the DOJ named it steering. So if you're taking your seller's offer of cooperative compensation and broadcasting it in a unilateral manner to everyone on a website, how is that any different than what Keller Williams got sued for hundreds of millions of dollars, lost in a $1.8 billion judgment? How is that? I'm going to ask you, Phil, because maybe I'm not getting it. On Keller Williams or any of these other large brokerages, I've been pre-negotiating my contracts, getting 3% or 2% for the buyer agent, putting that up on the MLS saying, we'll pay you 2%. And that got broadcast all over. And a lot of other websites were like Reddit, not Reddit.
Redfin showed it. Zillow showed it.
Right? They wanted the ability to show that stuff. That was a big deal. Now this lawsuit comes along and they're like, part of our settlement in a federal court for class action suit says, you can't do that anymore. But they didn't sue them they sued them over the anti-competitive practice of pre-negotiating buyer agent fees.
Right.
The DOJ has called it steering, and they said the proper model is listing agent and sellers, buyer agent and buyers. So how is this different? Am I missing it?
I mean, you're not missing anything, John. So if I can just choose to put it in, quite honestly, even in a different field, maybe that's okay. But I don't even. That's pretty similar. If I just there's a field for buyer concession. If I put in there a 2% or 3% credit towards buyer's agent fees or commission, that's really the same thing too. I mean,
okay. So
I think one of the things you said earlier that I just want to bring up is there's a difference between, you know, DOJ's opinion of all of this and the lawsuit versus a settlement. You know, so we might be complying with some tricky wording in a settlement, but the thing that got them sued, we're doing the exact same thing.
That's my point. They're advocating doing the exact same thing.
Right
there, in my opinion.
Right.
The exact same thing, minus it being in the MLS.
Right.
So has it really changed?
No. If what they're saying holds up, then no, they're doing the same.
How is Keller Williams going to be protected in Illinois or Massachusetts state court? How are they going to be protected in California court? Now, even if they're lawyers, and I'm sure they've got some good ones, we're saying we're going to remove, you named Keller Williams National Office in the suit, we're going to move it up to federal court. So now it will be litigated in federal court again. Are they sure that a federal court would say, oh, we're not going to apply state rules, we're going to apply federal rules? And secondly, even if that first one worked and that became the rule, then we just name Keller Williams brokers state office by office, city by city, state by state. If I'm an entrepreneuring plaintiff's lawyer, I will make sure I don't name Keller Williams National. I'll just name the state brokerages.
And those are all independently owned as well, with the local brokerage. They have to have a local broker.
Right. And then how are they going to protect my seller? This is really the gall. This is the most galling thing. Real estate agents are like, we can do it. We can do it. We can make sure we got compensation to the buyer side. And I know deep down, I've already made the argument. Sometimes your sellers can sell their home for more and a higher net by offering compensation to buyer's agents. I get it. And I resent the federal government doing that to me. But I'm still, the most important thing is protection of your sellers here. They're selling their home. It's their asset that you get to make money because you're helping them sell their asset. It's not like your commission is the business and the house is the incidental. The house is the important thing. The families you're helping is the important thing. You're getting paid because you're helping them do it better than they would by themselves.
Right.
So if that's my goal, how can I be saying it's okay for me to offer compensation to buyer's agents when the DOJ's called it steering, when the DOJ said using percentages incentivizes buyer's agents maybe to have them, their own clients, their own principals pay more for the home.
Right.
Well,
I think where some of this comes, just to play the side that I'm seeing on the internet, I think that NAR has done a poor job of explaining this in any real detail, and the industry seems to be taking the approach of how can we keep this similar to what we have now? How can we save the business? When in reality, it's a list. They're telling you to separate. So if you're going to be a listing agent, you should be worried strictly about your seller. And there's certainly a way to do this, which we're going to get into, but I shouldn't really care about the buyer agent's compensation. It shouldn't be a factor in, other than helping. And there's lots of reasons why having an agent might get you a higher price, but there's a way to pay that without advertising or creating a situation where you steer or putting this in field. It just seems like the gut reaction of the industry is, okay, how do we do magic semantics?
Buyer agent commission. How do we protect buyer agent commission?
Right.
It seems to be the gut reaction.
Right. And quite frankly, I'm a little surprised that the videos that I see from some of the top coaches and listing agents out there, that they're not saying, maybe if you're a listing agent and that's what you're doing, maybe they could take a different angle and charge a little more and do a little more versus trying to keep the other side alive, so to speak.
Well, you brought that up with me yesterday, and that's a good point. If buyers are to be protected still, and we'll get to the models. I have questions for you on each model, but there's likely to be more double siding. So listing agents might want to charge, I get 2.5% when I'm just representing you, but if I'm representing the buyer, that's another percent and a half. So you could see how organically without going to the listing agreement and setting up the buyer compensation ahead of time. You can see how organically you could say, and we'll address offers coming in with requests for buyer compensation on an ad hoc or case-by-case basis, which is really what I think DOJ is saying. Is let the buyers and the buyer agent work that out. And then if your seller wants to, or if it's in their interest to accept an offer that has a request for buyer compensation, your seller can respond by countering both the price and probably the agent commission. I don't think agents should be discussing buyer agent compensation, but I think the seller can negotiate buyer agent compensation down.
Right.
But that could be an organic process where it's negotiated. And if the listing agent already had 1% or 1.5% set aside to help buyers, because it is more work, and I think lawyers should be brought in on it, then that would be a number that could probably, most sellers would easily say, yeah, okay, I'll take that offer with 1.5%.
I think that was the intent, as I understood it, of the settlement, of the lawsuits, would be to come up with a system where the seller has true transparency and so does the buyer, but meaning that the seller pre-apps the listings on the MLS and other websites, and an agent calls me to say, are you paying compensation? And we communicate that, the seller will look at all offers. If you want compensation, put it into the offer. And that way my seller sits down with 2 or 3 offers and they can really look at what's our best net. If somebody's coming in with a higher price that benefits the seller and it has an agent commission, but it still nets the most, they might pay it. They might choose it. Whereas if somebody else comes in with no agent, and because they're not asking for any compensation, they have the highest price, then that buyer wins. And I think that's the true competitiveness of it.
All right. And because I hadn't thought about discussing this today, because this was in the back of my mind for a future video, but since we just danced around the subject, we might as well hit it today. This is now going to be just a comprehensive video, and we'll have to take out pieces for smaller videos or instructions for clients and things. If you're a buyer agent and you're going to like the California Association of Realtor forms, and you're going to need access to the MLS, but do you want to be governed by what I think is the most useless concept of this whole suit, and that they're trying to say that buyer's agents who are members of the National Association of Realtors may not write, I'm going to take whatever compensation is being offered by the listing agent. So if I agreed ahead of time to work for 1%, but they're offering 2.5%, I can't take it. If the industry works out, as I'm suggesting it might organically, with a new compensation level set, but pretty standard, houses that sell immediately will be offering nothing. Houses with nice views that are hard to value will offer some. Houses that you really need a buyer to hold people in there because they're overpriced, smart buyers agents need to come in from other towns and bring their strong buyers because your property is overpriced for the area, but it's got a view and a beautiful backyard. Those agents you're going to have to reward by incentivizing them just to come see your house. But in the end, if I'm a buyer agent, if I'm a good buyer agent, do I want to be a member of NAR?
That's an interesting take. I think some of this is going to settle out like.
Well, let's describe exactly what went through your mind. If I'm a buyer agent, do I want to be governed by some rule that they caused to be inflicted upon me that says
you're asking the wrong guy. You already know my answer. I would say no. There's a lot of things that NAR does that I don't want to be a part of, but we have to be a part to get the MLS, which kind of goes back to the original lawsuit where they kind of control the game.
Well, the MLS in California can be you can be a member of the.
Can be right, and that's very interesting to see with this whole settlement where this shakes out for the National Association of Realtors. There's the reality guy, Mercio.
My prediction is some buyers agents will, if compensation levels for buyers agents are sometimes fairly high.
Right.
In certain areas, it probably, like luxury real estate, it will be. Right. I think those realtors will choose not to be governed by NAR rules.
Right. I can see that for sure.
All right. Just side note. Because I frankly don't see why a listing agent has to agree to not get more if more is not accept more if more is
offered. Right.
If they discussed it ahead of time with their buyer, if it's written into their buyer agent agreement, if that's something negotiated. I'll work, for instance, this is how I would see it going. I'm going to work for $50 an hour helping you look at properties and buy a home, or $100 an hour. But we'll try to negotiate 2.5% commission, and then I'll rebate whatever you pay me by the hour. Like, I think that would be a legit contract. And my reading or listening to what NAR said, that would not be a legit buyer agent's contract.
Right.
I think that's a beautiful contract. And I don't see how that doesn't happen. I mean, like that's a market driven thing. Like, pay me for my time, but if I really help you buy the home, which we both want, then I get compensated.
Right. I think one of the biggest things that the Association of Realtors has going for them is the control of the forms and the contracts. And it'll be interesting to see what they come up with to deal with all of these issues we're talking about. And I think ultimately that's probably, I can see the MLS becoming less and less important after this settlement, in the sense that we'll see how it gets aggregated to the other platforms out there, but over time, less and less important. But the forms and the contracts that they have for an average real estate professional is still worth a lot to them. So they're not paying an attorney out there. I think that could still hold people in.
Okay. So
but let's get back to what we were talking about.
So now I'm going to ask you, oh, you can't even see that. Let me see if I can stop the screen share for a second and show you my questions that I'm going to be looking at, because people are probably wondering where I've been looking the whole time. Share screen, untitled document. So there's a Google Doc. I just cut and pasted it, so it's kind of ugly. So now, in light of this statement, this is the statement I think will be governing all attorneys when reviewing the practices of real estate agents, either from protecting sellers, protecting realtors, or suing sellers and suing realtors, will be this.
And this is a statement from where, John?
Thank you for telling me that. It is a statement of interest of the United States, Jennifer Nosalek, Nosalek, et al., versus MLS Property Information Network. That's the MLS PIN. There's a Massachusetts class action suit in which the Department of Justice filed a memo or a paper in opposition to settlement because they didn't do what came out a few weeks later, and that was agree to have zero compensation on the MLS. That's what they were pushing for, along with other things, and they made their arguments why. I think it's a very telling statement of what the Justice Department thinks. And that they said that the rule currently requires the listing broker to make an unconditional and blanket unilateral offer of compensation to the buyer broker, which the buyer broker knows prior to initiating any sales effort. So basically, it's an unconditional offer, which the buyer broker knows prior to even initiating any sort of effort. Like, in other words, bring their client to the property, advise their client on what we should see. The buyer broker sees this number ahead of time and can therefore rank their desires to show properties based on how much they're going to get paid. That was one of the issues that was in these lawsuits. And this is what DOJ said about it. Nonetheless, the rule creates tremendous pressure on sellers to offer the standard super competitive commission because seller/brokers know that if published blanket offer is less than the standard commission, many buyer brokers will steer home buyers to residential properties that provide the higher standard commission. I don't think there can be any question that offering more money to buyer's agents can result in more showings. And hopefully those agents are bringing buyers that would be interested in your property. And therefore, you might sell your home for more. And I'll just say this. I've had videos. People can go out and visit. My friend Matt Jones from a long time ago wrote a book, How to Sell Fast. And I actually have copies of it and once gave them away to people. It was the most interesting read. He talked about how in a development of properties where it was near an Army base in North Carolina, he was in Green. I'm sorry, I'm spacing on where he was from. But I visited him. I worked for his company for a while. I worked with him I advised him as an attorney. He showed in his data that by offering 4% commissions, his clients were selling similar homes for more money. Now, why would that be? Well, one of the things we've talked about, and I saw in my own practice when doing this, is that a relocation buyer, and some of the big brokerages have them, in the past. I don't hear about it as much now. A relo buyer would be coming in from out of town because they're getting relocated. They're busy people. They're not that price sensitive. They basically want a home that their family's going to be happy with, and they're usually in the middle of their career, because presidents aren't getting transferred too often by relocation companies. They're usually in the middle of their career, and they need homes in good neighborhoods with good schools for their family that their family's going to be happy with. And they see it. They're getting all sorts of incentives to move. They're moving. Things are being paid. Sometimes they're being helped out with the home. Sometimes the company's buying their old house from them without the commissions. So they're usually flush with some cash. And what they don't have is time. And they're willing to come in and just buy a house. They're not going to worry about 15, 20, 1%, 2%, 3%. They just want a house that their family's going to be happy in, because they're already, the daughter or the son's already pissed. They're not going to be in the same high school. And they're just like, get me a nice house. I'm done. They're not price sensitive in general. And those agents,
and I can tell you, as a real estate agent, when I have a listing, if I receive an offer from for my clients from a relocation, and the agent is a relocation agent, and they're still out there, John, and they tell you that situation, in my opinion, when I'm explaining and answering questions to a client, to the seller, those are the strongest and best offers you can possibly take, because they often will not even come back to see the house again. Until they close. They're just people that, if they don't get this deal done, they're going to be living at the Marriott down the street, and they don't have time for that. So absolutely.
And so incentivizing an extra percent to them, they're going to take their time to bring their buyers to your property. If your property is a nice property, you're in great shape. And why are they price sensitive? Because they're already paying the relocation company 1%. They're already paying their broker 0.5%, and there's already very little money in it for them. And I've actually had their brokers, you may have been in on the file and said, well, you had it in there as an incentive, and can you just put it into the commission? And I've also had it go vice versa, because if it was one way, then the relo company would take 50%, and in the other way, it went directly to the buyer agent. I said, it's not going to you. He goes, no, I'm calling from my buyer agent. I want her to get paid. So, I changed the structure of it so that the more money went to the buyer agent, because she was not going to get a lot of money anyway. So, that happens. And that's big corporations, right? Those corporations are probably friends with the DOJ. So those are relos. So anyway, there's no doubt, in the used properly, it will help people bring their buyers to the property. But I can also argue the other way. I don't think it's always going to result in steering, because sometimes you're just bringing better buyers to the property that normally they wouldn't have been looking at. They might have been looking somewhere else. And so you're incentivizing that agent to bring the really good buyers to a property. So in light of the concerns about steering, and in light of the other statement about incentivizing buyers agents to have their clients overpay for properties, I'd like to go over with you what, we're going to go over the different models. Let me just see. I had these quotes. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, and you can refer back to me, these questions. Does a settlement end class action suits in the states? I think we've already said that. Does the settlement allow brokers to pre-negotiate co-ops? This is what I heard an agent ask NAR, and he kind of assumed that they could, but was asking the NAR president, and he said, I'm not a lawyer. What do you think the risks are to the agent and to the sellers if you're pre-negotiating a co-op? In other words, if you're going in on your listing agreement and say, we're going to pay 2% to the buyer side, write it in, but I'm allowed to do this because I'm not going to put it on the MLS.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that kind of goes against the lawsuit that they lost, regardless of how they're settling it. I think the better model is to worry about your own.
That one. We got other models. Okay. I'm going to say, not only are they risking their brokerage and their careers with that silliness, but they're probably risking their seller's assets, because now you've got a document that could be discovered,
right?
That could be part of discovery, and there you're going to say we're paying money to buyers agents before we even took in offers or evaluated the market and saw what kind of response. And I just don't get it. Are they that tone deaf to what was going on in these lawsuits?
Right.
DOJ's called it unethical or steering.
Right. So you're going to sit in the listing agreement and ask them to set up the steer.
In fact, if that practice becomes commonplace, I'll become a class action lawyer, right? Because those people, I think, deserve to be sued out of the business for risking their clients' assets, unless some new thing changes and they're like, okay, DOJ says it's allowed, and the states all say it's allowed, or the states win versus DOJ. But during the time where we don't have clarity on this, that practice is nuts, in my legal opinion. But I reserve the right to change it. A good lawyer comes along in the comments and tells me why I'm wrong. I'll absolutely adjust. Because I business-wise, I see good business models for that too. Now, does the settlement allow brokers to write notes into seller concession for buyer, speaking directly to buyer agent comp? In other words, 2% set aside as a concession for buyer agent compensation on the MLS.
I think that's pretty risky sounding practice to me. I wouldn't do it. It's just like we're using field B instead of field C. Right. They made us get rid of field C, so we'll use field B.
Well,
why
okay,
not
what about the argument?
Remarks? Why stop there?
What about the argument we saw? They can't come up after us for 7 years. That's right. This stuff's argued on the internet by realtors. We're good for 7 years because we're protected by the class action suit.
Yeah, I don't think so.
How do they know?
I guess that's
in state court. How do you know you're protected? How do you know you're not destroying your seller's future assets and the deal? How do you know you're not opening it up for lawyers to extract money after closing?
Right. And are you even benefiting your seller properly by doing that on something that, which I guess goes to your case in point of open yourself up for lawsuits?
Yeah, or why not? Yeah, exactly. But why not test the market at zero for a little while?
Right. That's
a very good point you just made.
I don't know why on the internet right now we're seeing so many agents fighting for other agents to hold on to a model that they've told us they don't want to see. Worry about your client.
Exactly, Phil. Does the settlement allow percentage-based compensation to buyer's agents?
I don't know. I mean, so I guess what comes into my mind, the only thing that I have a question for you, and that brings it up, is that are agents really even allowed? So I have a listing, agent calls me, will your seller pay comp? I tell them, put it in their offer. Are agents really allowed to have a conversation with each other about the other agent's compensation?
I'd be worried about, that's a great question. I think everyone can see why this might be running afoul, setting commissions behind the client's backs on the phone. I'm not so sure that that's really listing agent and seller and buyer agent and buyer. I'm not sure.
The better practice to me would be put it in your offer, and then I present all offers to the seller, and me and the seller can have a conversation.
Which is exactly what you said to me the other day, and I was like, I agree. That's
because I work for a lawyer.
That worked for me as a lawyer. I'm like, yeah. Oh, someone calls me on the phone. Hey, Phil, you offering 2%? My client's open to compensation. No, my client's open to strong offers, which who knows? A strong offer could have buyer compensation in it. Send it over. We'll evaluate it. Or you might even go a little further and say, we're not against it. Send it over. Let's put the offer in writing.
And that would be something that once I have a listing agreement, and I'm certainly going to explain to any seller the benefits, as you talk the relocation. There's a lot of benefits that where they may want to offer compensation, but it really should depend on the offer, and if it makes sense to them and they net the right number, then, and if they tell me they're open to it, I think it would be okay for me then to, with their permission, to pass on, my seller's open to it, put in an offer, send it over.
Okay. So we may have already discussed this. Does the settlement allow advertising of buyer broker compensation on other websites, including the agent's own website?
I just think that's, as a layman and not a lawyer, they've told you not to do this. It's the whole reason they have. It's not the whole reason, but it's one of the major things that resulted in the DOJ letter, and it was a losing lawsuit. So why would you do it? Why would you just be like, oh, we'll put it on a different website, no problem, business as usual? It just seems silly. But the internet is on fire with people saying, I mean, that's your Keller Williams president or CEO giving an interview. That seems a little crazy.
I'm going to tell you, I don't know the answer, but the only way I would never have a seller do that. And I may have to. Like if we have sellers that can't sell their homes with 0 on the MLS and the seller doesn't want to come down in price, we're like, well, should we advertise to real estate agents that we're offering more? Should we go to the buyer? Should we go to the broker caravans? Should we advertise in an email list? Although emails are all blocked now. Should we do it in social media? At some point, we either have to say, let's refer it out to a lawyer to a brokerage that doesn't care about their future, but we would still have to protect my seller, right? Like I don't know that I'd be doing it at we may, who knows, we might become desensitized to it in 2 years or a year. You may say, John, if we're not doing it, I'm leaving your brokerage. But
I just don't know why. I guess time will tell. You're right. We'll see. I don't see a big difference between agents are going to call you anyways. They're going to schedule showings. You're going to have interaction with them as a listing agent. I think it would be a safer practice, a better practice for seller to just convey that when they're serious rather than take the chance of, to me, if I put any of this out there, I'm sending up the flagpole that, hey, for me and my seller, we might be steering you to our deal.
I'm going to find a way to characterize the compensation to an attorney. First, we're going to get into the model. So first would be 2% for closing costs and attorneys, or 2.5% for closing costs and attorneys. And the attorney can compensate the buyer's agent. That would be my first way to do it, to try to protect my sellers, because I don't think an attorney getting paid and splitting the fees or paying someone for their work in their office is going to be able to come back as a plaintiff in a class action lawsuit, or even win if his buyer comes back later and says, I don't know why you paid my attorney. And you'll be like, I'm bringing your attorney in this. Didn't you explain to them about your conflicts here and you still accepted the money? And by the way, luckily I had you sign this piece of paper saying you did explain the conflicts. So I think the safer way would be to have attorney run brokerages. I think I just created a business model, by the way, Phil. I think we're going to have to do that.
We have one.
I think we're going to have to do that. Because the first way would be, the second better way would be, if you're offering buyer compensation, especially if it's a percentage, they're going to have an attorney sign off on this. Say they canceled the client, and then you're going to have I would have the seller pretty much come close to waiving any rights to be part of a class, or come back and sue you after the file closes. There's ways we'd have to work on ways to do that. But the point is, I have to insulate my sellers as best they can, and this may be best accomplished by me referring those files over to realtors that don't care about their future. Who are like, oh, I don't care about my assets in the future. I want to make some money today.
Right. Yeah.
Because
I think the danger of like these little things that like I could see if done properly, maybe it works, but the danger of putting those out there is you're putting it out there to, 1.6 million realtors that don't have the benefit of possibly having a broker who's an attorney, it's not that they're malicious or they don't care about their clients. They might not see these risks that are in their way.
Clearly they don't.
And there'll be lots of them that are just sloppy. And,
Right. Anybody.
I also real quick will bring up, like, we're coming off of a 10-year run of nothing but appreciation. Lawsuits get I've been doing this for 20 years. Lawsuits get really quiet when prices are going up because what are your damages, right?
Unravel the deal and start again.
Right. When prices start going the other way, the lawsuits come out. Like people, I think I saw, and don't quote me on this. You've probably all seen this headline. I know for sure it said that, X% of buyers are unhappy with the decision they made in the pandemic. And I want to say it was around 70%. It was a big number. It was more than 50. And that could be, that always happens when there's multiple offers, et cetera. But they have equity. So they're just unhappy. They know they could sell their house. If we go into the next 10-year cycle, maybe with the boomer generation starting to pass away, downsize, move to assisted living, prices start to see a downturn at some point, all of these little issues that everyone's going to say, oh, it doesn't matter. Who's going to sue you for that? Well, they will, they will. You have a lot more incentive to get out of your house if it's worth less than you bought it for than you do when it's going up. And I'll just leave it at that. Get back on track, John.
All right. Okay, so I have a let's review the business models and rate the risks to broker and seller, as well as benefits. So I think this will be another video entirely, and maybe we'll just cut this one up. But here's my first question with respect. Why is it such a big deal? So my question here, first question was, why offer buyer compensation? What's the big deal? Is it just so agents get rich? Buyers agents get rich? And
No, but I mean,
get double
one of my
commission?
biggest fears of this whole model deteriorating completely is that an underrepresented buyer, it's not a good idea. The notion that you're just going to do buying a home like a for sale by owner, there's a lot of risk. You need to know what forms for your state are required for disclosure. You need some advice on things to look for at a bare minimum.
Experts to hire
to do evaluations for you. When a home inspector gives you a report, the report's going to say on every topic that we recommend you hire a roofer. We recommend this, but somebody who's seen 100 reports who can say, listen, you definitely want to follow up on this issue. This is not something I see in every house. This buckling in the floor is a big deal. You don't want to be in a situation, you just need knowledge, and you can scour the internet and be a super informed person and you're probably could be okay, but there's a lot of pitfalls that agents can help you with, right down to a good agent with negotiation can save you a lot of money, a lot more than you pay them.
But why would a seller want to offer buyer compensation to that agent?
So the seller would, when a buyer comes in to buy a house, if they're nervous, they're always going to be nervous. If they come by themselves, they're going to be more nervous, and there's a greater chance that something could shake them out and they cancel. So a seller knows, or a good listing agent certainly knows, that if a buyer is represented and has someone to counsel them and answer all these questions that make them nervous, they're likely going to be more confident, and a more confident buyer of any product is willing to pay more if they understand the process, they understand, the risks and the security, and even things like a home warranty. Buyer might never think of that. Those are things that make buyers feel very comfortable about maybe a questionable item on the inspection report. Well, we know we have the warranty, and to understand what that really means, does it even cover that? There's so many areas so I think buyers do need some level of representation to have the confidence to make strong offers. An unrepresented buyer could look at an inspection report. The home inspector's job is to find things. They often have 80, 120 items, but maybe only 10 of them are significant at all. That could make a buyer say, you know what? I'm not going to offer you 700,000. I'm going to drop my offer to 50 grand. Look at this list of 120 things. And so then that buyer either isn't willing to pay, ask for too much of a concession, and the seller, maybe that buyer loses out. But from the seller's angle, maybe those were not important things, and if they had proper representation, they wouldn't be in this problem, fighting over broken light switches, etc. So I mean, the list is very long as to why.
Well, I think I can summarize what we know.
Right.
That if you're a buyer, you're like, well, the house is worth 800, but there could be a whole bunch of issues that I'm not aware of. So I'm much more comfortable offering 725 or 750.
Right.
But if you can meet those mental objections ahead of time,
right,
make them comfortable at the transaction, knowing they'll be protected ahead of time, they might make their full price offer in the beginning or closer to it. So the idea is the more comfortable you can make a strong buyer, the more likely you're going to get a strong offer. And then also a represented buyer is less likely to have cold feet and start behaving irrationally during the deal. And also, I was going to say, so the inspections, a lot of buyers, as you say, will see that, we'll win the multiple offer situation, but we'll make the money back after negotiations. We'll try to negotiate 50,000 down after we send in our inspectors. And a buyer agent might know that's not going to work in this situation because they've got multiple offers. They'll just sell to the other guy, and they'll save time by explaining that to people.
Right.
So there are times for a seller that having a represented buyer, like I would always tell my seller at some number, if their house is selling for this much, a small number here to make that buyer feel comfortable is probably worth it to them if they want to close on time and get on with their lives.
And John, let me ask you this as a lawyer, because I feel this as a listing agent. If I have a represented buyer, I feel that helps alleviate some potential liability, that they have representation down the road if something were to go wrong.
If I didn't offer them a blanket offer of compensation on homes.com or Zillow ahead of time, I would agree. I'm not so comfortable if I'm steering or incentivizing them to pay more.
Right. If done correctly, but a buyer's agent also, I think you have some level of as a seller, listing agent representing the seller, that things are being explained to them so they understand it.
I far prefer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's better, and so I have to weigh that feeling that you can't really quantify.
Right.
With some sellers want every last dollar, and then you say, well, yeah, you can save $2,000, but we can't really say for sure. But this buyer might run, and then you'll have to start this process again. But I'm not going to try. I've had good friends want every last dollar, and you just have to go. You explain the risks, and you say, "But I'm here for you, however you want to go." But other times, people, it's very seller dependent,
and it really depends on the market. Again, like I was saying before, we've been in an up market where did you need to pay buyer compensation when you had 21 offers come in? Probably not.
In a housing development where everyone knew what the price of the house was worth.
Right. Where it's tract homes out in, Phoenix or out in, East Lake out in Chula Vista where it's a model match.
You probably didn't need a listing agent either. That's just for convenience.
Right.
Now, so if you're going to offer buyer compensation, when are we going to offer?
I like the idea, even in a hot market, of going a set amount of time, but to test this out, how this is going to work. I think the smartest thing is what we've talked about, the two-step model, where we're willing to put it on the MLS with zero compensation for a set amount of time. And that'll be evaluated depending on, I think you have to look at the sub-market, the actual subdivision, the city, the town, not just the overall market, to come up with that time frame, but probably 2 weeks where we do an open house where we can have anybody come in. We get responses from the internet. We kind of gauge the marketplace and see. And then if that does not succeed in bringing in, a dozen people, 7, 8 people, and interest in the property, then at that time, it may be well worth it to see what offering, what being willing to pay buyer compensation does. So at that time, maybe when I get a phone call the day I've listed the property, will you pay a buyer's compensation? Maybe my seller's not comfortable doing that yet. Check back with me in a couple weeks. But at some point, if we're struggling to sell the home, I think the seller should be open to the notion of looking at offers with buyer's compensation. And I still am a little torn, because if somebody's interested enough that they're going to write an offer, I think it's in the seller's interest to see that offer.
I think, as you're saying this, I'm thinking I'm going back to the idea of all offers are reasonable. Just send them in. Just let us evaluate them. Whatever compensation you want. You can ask for 10% your offer. Go for it. But I'm gonna counter to a flat fee that's near 10%. If my seller really wants to do that, I'm gonna change any percentages to flat fees for now. I mean, that I think that's the one piece of advice I can say unequivocally. There's no point in making that final percentage, that final payment, a percentage. Negotiate it down, and if somehow there's a concession and the property price goes down, your seller might have to just say, "Hey, look, it was 3%, that was 30,000. We made it a flat fee of 28 or 20 or 10 that you agreed to, and now I don't know why the price will go down." But the point is, I think
no one's incentivizing a higher price.
The percentages need to be turned into a flat fee, in my opinion. Even if they started out as a percentage, make it a flat fee. That's the easiest way to comply with the DOJ issue I've ever seen.
Right.
Now, when to negotiate buyer compensation, safest. No, okay. So the safest model, and the one we're hoping, which is the why we want to go with two weeks for sellers and brokers, is no buyer compensation ever. Offer comes in and you can negotiate to zero. You just say zero or a small amount. You're like, oh, they want 20,000. Offer them 2. See what happens, right? That to me is the safest model. Start with 0, and then the seller can decide. I'd say it's even safer to go 0. I mean, that's a sweet deal. If you can get offers that the clients are thinking about accepting with an offer of 0 compensation, the seller saved a lot of money, and you probably got no risk, or very, very little risk. Minimal risk to agent and seller. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the safest model. The other thing I just want to bring up too, when we were talking about why you'd offer compensation, is that you also, if the buyer's agents start using the buyer broker agreement, and they're going to start holding people to paying compensation. So the buyer may have to pay that compensation if you're not willing to, that's just something sellers should be ready in the negotiation stage to realize, that if you don't agree to pay something that satisfies their buyer agent agreement,
it could blow up the deal.
Absolutely.
But then, can a buyer agent really blow up the deal, or do they have
that's what we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, that's a whole other video.
I wouldn't want to be that buyer agent.
But in the end, in a few years, I expect it to be buyers agents to not be members of the MLS, and new contracts by non MLS people are going to be promulgated or used more often. Okay, so the second step would be start with 0. The second safe is start with 0 and negotiate buyer agent compensation on an ad hoc basis. And if your clients really want to be safe and you're negotiating some buyer agent compensation, I would say as part of this compensation, the buyer needs to have an attorney advising them on the deal. And I would definitely have an addendum in my contract where buyers sign saying they understand that by accepting compensation for their buyer, they could have gotten the house for a lower price or something. I mean, I've already worked out the wording. I don't feel like dealing with it here. But we're going to have, if you're paying compensation to the buyer's agent, you want that buyer to be properly advised about the issues of accepting compensation and waiving some of their rights. I mean, just like NAR is saying, buyers need to sign buyer agent. They're going to require buyer agents to have contracts with the buyers. Sellers are going to need to have contracts with buyers if buyer agent compensation is involved. It's that critical an issue, in my opinion. Do you agree?
I agree. Yeah, I'm curious if NAR is going to come out with any of those type of forms as well, because they did adapt. Like back in the short sale days, they came out with some pretty good.
They have to. Once they're in declaring these settlements, I think they have to.
Right.
Allow buyer lawyer compensation as a concession into the MLS.
I don't see why you couldn't do that.
Where would you rank that as an excellent practice, a good practice, and why?
I mean, it's an excellent practice because you in the listing, you're saying, please talk to a lawyer and I'll pay for it. So if they choose not to, that really puts the burden on them. And if they choose a lawyer, they're going to have the compensation issue explained to them. They're going to have their questions professionally answered by a competent person, not by a third party, I should say, not by somebody that's tied to the deal in any way. So
right. And I can already see that we're not going to force it on them, but we're going to make it available. And we're going to have the buyer sign a contract or an addendum accepting it or not. I just thought about it. And if there's any compensation going anywhere, that's going to be in there to protect my sellers.
That's a great idea. I think that's a great idea.
Accepting offers. Can a realtor advise their client to accept an offer with buyer compensation included? Please discuss percentage-based compensation versus flat fee-based compensation.
Okay, so yes, they can advise to accept an offer with compensation. I think you already addressed it, that the wiser move would be to get rid of a percentage and make it a flat fee, so that they're not there's no conflict. Because what happens down the road when you first accept that contract for $1 million, you're not thinking at that time that price could change. But when we go to inspections or a whole list of other things, I don't want to waste time. There's a lot of reasons that price could change throughout the course of that contract but we'll use inspections. So now when they want to lower the price or do a credit, if there's small amounts in the big picture, but you're talking thousands of dollars that make a difference in the commission. Whereas if upfront, when we do this deal, we come up with a flat fee, the agent's getting paid X dollars, $10,000. That doesn't change in inspections. That doesn't change. I mean, that's part of what DOJ is getting at, is that every step of the way, there's some incentive based on price versus based on protecting your clients. And I'm not even remotely saying that even most agents play that game, but some do 100%. And it just shouldn't be there. So yes, you can advise them. You should make that comp a flat fee up front in the beginning, and then you'll not have any more of these issues where you say, well, if they would have given me a credit, it would have saved me some money versus if they change the purchase price. So yes, that's my answer, John. You tell me.
Well, I think it's minimizing the risk or eliminating the risk of it being called steering,
Right.
as long as there was no pre-negotiated compensation.
Right.
Well,
and as I read that's accepting an offer with compensation and ask for comp. So
like initially on an ad hoc basis,
right.
Not because you said
as they come in, not because we advertised it. Right.
And the risk of you causing a conflict between the buyer agent and its principal, I think is also almost, normally I'm on that side of protecting the seller, but if it just comes in out of the ad hoc basis, I don't know, maybe you don't even need to make them. I think in most circumstances, I'd want a buyer, if compensation is involved, I'd want a buyer's lawyer signing, but maybe we'll just get away with the addendum there from the buyer's agent waiving all sorts of rights to future lawsuits based on the issue of compensation. And we don't need a lawyer in that one because if it's just all precipitated by the buyer and the buyer agent, and you haven't discussed compensation ahead of time, at the moment I'm feeling that would be pretty good. I wouldn't be that worried about it. I might still want to buy an attorney if it's a significant amount of money, but I could see it not being that risky to sell. What do you think? Is that overprotective of sellers if I would require?
Well, I think some of this we have to see how this plays out over time, right?
Yeah, okay. I leave that one up in the air for now then. I think we discussed this before. Offer possibility of agent compensation as a concession,
right,
on the MLS versus on other websites.
I think there's probably nothing wrong with a statement of a concession. I would not put in there anything about maybe used as buyer's compensation. Like,
I would say attorney compensation.
Right. I really like that. What you said earlier, I think that's a great.
If I'm offering compensation in public, it's going to be $20,000 attorney compensation concession, which could be used by buyer for buyer attorney or something like that.
And then what about like traditionally that field is used for things like this: seller offering $5,000 for new carpet because the carpet is trashed, and so they want to address that right up front.
Closing costs,
right.
escrow, whatever.
Right.
Attorneys.
Right
I've been paid on attorneys on the HUDs many times, $2,000 to $4,000.
Would you put that? I guess I'm asking this. So let's just say I have a seller that wants to offer towards closing costs to buy down the rate, because that's going to help sell their home in this market. Would you also add the statement and or buyer, or just put and buyer attorney fees, attorney costs? Would you put that in just to protect our sellers a little bit more? Or do you think that's not
Well,
necessary?
I'm already saying if my seller needs to sell their home because we tried otherwise and we're like, lowering the price isn't going to really do it. We gotta get agents incentivized to bring their buyers from higher end markets down to this one because this is a special house. We got to sell this property for my seller. Lowering the price isn't going to get these people in until we go way too low for it. So I want to incentivize buyers. First of all, I'd say let's refer this out to another brokerage, and I'll protect my seller as best I can as a lawyer. That would be ideal. But if I'm not, I'm doing this more for other people. This isn't my model necessarily. For other people, if I really want to incentivize buyers agents in the most practical, safe way for my sellers as possible, it's simply got to be up to $25,000 concession for a buyer attorney.
Okay.
I'm not saying agent ever, because the buyer attorney, I'm presuming, could explain, they're going to be able to explain conflicts to their buyer, to a buyer agent. The buyer agents are going to go, I need to work for attorneys because attorneys can take care of these conflicts to some degree and sign off it and be a certified. I'm going to go more into the certified buyer concept, but we've got to make sure that the buyers understand why the compensation is going to them, that they've been advised by attorneys that they could have negotiated a lower price in the house, that essentially it may be coming out of their pocket because it could have been their money, and that they're choosing, therefore, to have a buyer agent work with them on this transaction. So I'm going to leave it up to the attorney to apportion that money as he or she sees fit, and she may compensate a buyer agent with 90% of that money, or she may pay a buyer agent by the hour. But if I really want to offer compensation out in the public and not have my seller worried about steering and compromising the buyer's agent fiduciary duties.
So I got you on that subject. I just had something pop in that, again, we haven't seen it much in the last 5-6 years, but I've seen it a lot in my career. How about this one, John? Remember when times are tough and people like to put in there in the remarks, willing to pay $5,000 bonus to agent for successful close by April 15th. Bad idea.
This is now where you hit my lawyer protecting my seller versus my lawyer protecting the seller, because that money I found to be useful.
Right.
It works. And now you would think the DOJ is saying that's wrong. Oh, that's tough. That's like, can we really let the feds stop my seller from getting top dollar or getting their house sold?
Because undoubtedly that creates steering, but I mean, it does work. I've done it before.
I think I would have in the future, we'll have videos. If our client, obviously, we need to have these. We're going to have to go questions and quick videos, a little checklist in the site for all our clients for whenever. Like if they have this question at midnight, I don't want to be called at midnight. We're going to have this stuff in a buyer. Like we're going to have our buyers and sellers on our website with short videos on these questions that could come up.
Right.
I'm leaning towards no, but if my seller,
maybe that's also on a case-by-case basis.
It's ad hoc. Yeah, I'm probably bringing a buyer's attorney in on that one. There's got to be a buyer's agent attorney if we're doing that. A buyer attorney. I guess we got to just call them buyer's attorneys. Home buyer attorney. The next one, offer. That's a good question, by the way. Offer out on other websites.
Offer compensation on other websites? No, I would not do that at this time.
I don't know what I was thinking, why this was at F. Negotiate 0 with future flat fee. I think because we already covered it earlier.
Okay.
So we start. Oh no, that's. What do you think of the model? Yeah, we already did cover it. It's the same. You start off with 0, and then the choice is always 0 or agree to a flat fee in the future.
Right.
That's probably our safest model, right?
Right.
That's the one sellers concerned about their future and their assets, I think, should always start off with, because if they get no showings, then would it really be fair of courts to say they're not allowed to do some marketing to help them sell their home? Like,
Right.
get some data in there. Say we got a few calls but no offers. We got some showings but no offers. We had an open house. No one showed up. We had to do something different.
And again, at this exact moment in Southern California, I think there's enough activity and a tight enough inventory that won't be a question. But a lot of this stuff is going to evolve as the market changes. I mean, we've both lived through different markets, and it's going to change. And some of the things I see other agents putting out there are so based on like the last 5 years that it makes me laugh that they don't see the other scenarios. So.
Okay, so I saw this is different as percentage earlier. Offer flat fee out on other websites. Same things. Flat fee's better.
Right.
Again, I'd rather make it an attorney.
Right.
And then I got, this was the killer. This is the one that I think, if your realtor is talking to you and pre-negotiating, so on your listing agreement, before you sign it, if there's anything but 0 in there, what would your advice be? And then I'll give my advice. Listing appointment.
Okay, if I go on a listing appointment, I'm going to tell that when we're talking about a listing agreement, that's where they're agreeing to pay me. I'm going to tell them what they're agreeing to pay me and what I'm going to do for them. Everything that I'm going to do, explain my experience. I am definitely not, in light of this settlement or the lawsuit, I am definitely not going to worry about what's going to happen to somebody else's commission if they're going to get paid, because we're not doing that. I will explain to them what we've talked about. There are situations where it may benefit you to pay another agent, but we need to see those situations unfold in, as you say, the ad hoc basis. Let the offers come in, and we'll discuss those when they come in. But in no way am I going to sit there and say, hey, let's go ahead and just put this down right now that you'll pay 2% to another agent just so I don't have to come back to you. I think that's insane at this point.
I just typed in the ad hoc to make sure I used it correctly, and I did. I was worried.
Yes, I wouldn't do that, and I don't understand why you would put your seller and yourself at risk to pay someone else. Let them put it in their offer so we can compare apples to apples.
I like that. Now compare and contrast that with a with a 2-level of compensation listing agreement for you just as the listing agent. Like I don't even have what's our brokerage policy going to be? Let's say we have a flat fee right now where we're getting data for sellers. Are we going, and buyers do take work, working with their lenders, calling them all the time, getting paperwork back and forth. I mean, there's work there. Everyone needs to know, representing more than one party. One party is work. A second party comes in for a little less work because some of the work's duplicative. But working with buyers and phone calls, especially in the evenings, happens when you're working with buyers. So
right.
Can there be listing agreements where it's listing agent, listing fees for this much, but if I'm working with a buyer, it's that much? But of course, 100%. Mr. Seller, you'll determine whether you want me to work with that buyer.
Let's hash this out live. So we're running our flat fee, $3,000 to help us get data and see how fine-tune this process.
$3,000 with 0 to the buyer's agent.
Right, 0 to the buyer's agent and $3,000 flat fee. Now, if we meet after 2 weeks and we're discussing that maybe we need to be willing to, well, no, just this is at the listing. So that's what we're going to try to do it without one. But let's say on day one, as I'm telling the seller, I get a phone call and it's a buyer. They have no agent. They want to put in an offer. They want to know whether I choose we have dual agency or whether they're an unrepresented seller, and they get an attorney. I'm going to do more work.
You make a great point. How many buyers are going to have contracts already made?
They're not.
So they're going to ask you to write it.
Right.
Phil,
So
Phil, I want to make an offer. Would you write it up for me? I'm willing to go to 980,000.
right. So what I'm saying is back to that listing appointment. I think there's nothing wrong with saying, listen, maybe we'll be dirt cheap in the beginning because we want to get people going on this and see how it works. But so it's $3,000 to list your house. If I can find the buyer and represent the buyer as well, it's an additional $3,000, a flat fee. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there just for simplicity right now for sake. But back to your question, is there anything wrong with me saying you can also pay me if I represent the buyer's agent and the offer makes sense to you? You can pay me for my time if that's who buys your house. I think that's perfectly fine, in my opinion.
Very crafty. That was a good save on that second one. So it's not a percentage. I like the flat fee.
Likely, if they were going to come in with an offer from an agent, maybe through, I think there's, or do we say, pay me $3,000. I know you'll like this better, and I'll pay for the lawyer for them to consult with a buyer attorney. I'll draft the contract. I'll do the transaction forms. I won't represent them. I'll do them as an unrepresented buyer, and we'll pay for them to meet with an attorney out of that $3,000. So $500, whatever an hourly is for them to meet with an attorney so they can get some advice.
Well, that would be in the seller's interest. I think we should talk our sellers into setting some money aside for buyer's interest, so the buyers feel comfortable about making offers. I think
if you have an unrepresented buyer in this landscape, it's a win-win to give them an attorney because they're going to see that we're doing things correctly. They're going to have that confidence that we talked about. Attorney is happy to charge an hourly fee versus trying to get, they weren't making 20 grand to give advice last week like some of these agents are. They don't have it's probably a smart way to go. Should we get a phone call directly from a buyer, which I think is increasingly likely, and I don't think there's anything wrong with charging something to our seller for my time, but I think it's going to be a low number and it's going to be realistic for my time.
And frankly, okay, so the lawyer in me, when you brought this up, got stuck on how's that offer getting drafted? How's that buyer going to know whether you're really not representing them? Are we going to pre-fill the contracts for all our sellers and just say there's a sample of what the seller said they liked? Here it is. You can, of course, make changes, but you're unrepresented. I mean, even that gets tricky, I think.
Well, then you go the other way and it's dual agency and we disclose everything and properly. I've handled plenty of transactions dual agency, but I don't know if I love it as a model. It happens sometimes.
I think if we're touching a contract and sending it over to the buyer, I think we have to make sure we're either dual agents or we're having our client or else pay for an attorney to review the file and counsel the buyer. If it's conceivable that we're just saying you're going to have to represent on your own, send an offer over. We could do that, but are we really serving our seller? Is that really
no? It's not. If you get somebody you have to try, right. Yeah. Because what you're going to see more of, and you're already seeing it with just Zillow and the sites that are out there now, you're going to see more of the sellers who realize it's still competitive. I think there's like 2,200 homes on the market in San Diego right now. They're going to say, hey, why don't I reach out directly to listing agent and try to make this deal happen? And that way they're not paying an agent. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable to come up with a system, and I don't know that we will right here. But back to your original question, is it reasonable for me to say our flat fee is $3,000, and should a buyer reach out to us directly, we would want X dollars more so we can make sure they're properly represented by an attorney and get paid for any of our time being a TC or dual agent, Well, absolutely. I think that's
after we get off the air, I'll still be amazed if that number is as low as we were talking before, because I think it's an easier concept is that this is our number. And within that number, we will pay we'll make sure the buyer is represented by an attorney.
Right.
And we'll explain the reasons why that's good for the seller. Because I totally believe that a comfortable buyer is likely to make better offers.
100%.
In general.
And likely to deal with situations that come up better. You know, there's a lot of pitfalls that come up in transactions. They don't just run smoothly.
All right. So I think that's got to be part of our marketing. Okay. We're going to have to make that the linchpin of this concept.
Right. And you know, we're using 3,000 because we just want to throw that out, and we want to find people.
We can't do it for 3. It's got to be higher with money going to a buyer's attorney,
to a lawyer. Right.
I think because what we're going to, we'll talk about that off air.
Right. I think people understand that something has to be worth their time. We're just,
we're not doing it for the money right now. We want the data.
We're just doing it for testing right now. Our number will be much higher than that long term.
Here's the really interesting thing about right now. I think for the first time, putting 0 on the MLS is a very, very serious option for sellers across the board. Before it was people we knew their house was priced well, or was beautiful, or was in an area where our signs could bring a lot of people into the open house. They didn't need awareness to sell their home because it could be created easily. $100 on social media, some signs in the neighborhood, an open house, boom, there were going to be people there. And people were comfortable with the house because everyone in the neighborhood knows the prices. Now with 0 in the MLS, I've only done that a few times, and it had to be $1. And we got a lot of calls from agents. Why aren't you offering money? But we were, I think, always able to sell the home. Yes. But again, I wouldn't have done $1 if I thought it was a house that needed educated buyer's agents to educate their clients to stay in the deal. I would have said that's not feasible. But now with 0 in the MLS, it's going to be broadcast everywhere. And if we field the phone calls well, if we tell them all, find out more about our open house or whatever, here we've already got the disclosures made. We've already eliminated all their fears, and we have a buyer on their team. I think we could sell a lot. I'm thinking in the right markets at the right time, a lot of homes could sell, maybe for a higher net into the seller's pocket, but not always. So we want that data. I could be totally wrong, and we offer 0 and the houses don't sell. It's a possibility. I don't think in-demand homes will sell, I still think. But we'll see. But that's why we want to collect the data. We want to also do it to protect our future sellers. Why did you start off with compensation of the buyer agent within a week? Why did you come back and negotiate that with your seller? Why did you accept a contract where the buyer was asking for 2% or 3%? I mean, I'd like to have the data to insulate my clients from. Just
to point something out, if this class action lawsuit, I think they only had 5 plaintiffs or whatever. But if one of those plaintiffs had been represented in that manner, it would have had a greater chance of stalling that out. If they said, "Hey, I tried it at 0%, and then I did this, and then I did that," they wouldn't have the claims that they would have had.
Right. And again,
that's why you're suggesting all of these things.
I'm thinking what I'm trying to do is make sure that, if you knew lawyers that were smart, that wanted to have a cottage industry of making money for buyers who are disgruntled, I believe that will exist. So all you've got to do is say, "Hey, are you unhappy with your home purchase 6 months ago, 2 years ago? Did your agent, did the seller offer compensation on homes.com, Zillow, the MLS to buyer's agents?" Wow. Then
or right now, John, I can hear the Camp Lejeune commercial. It'll say, "Did your seller put an offer of compensation between May 15th when the settlement was announced and July 31st when it was finalized?"
Or anytime. And now you're like, "Okay, I'm calling up," and you're like, "Well, I got insurance for that." The agent might, but for the seller, because the lawyer would be saying, "I'm just trying to unwind this deal because compensation was offered improperly." How quickly will sellers or real estate agents have to offer up some money to make those lawyers go away when they can point to the fact we got the Department of Justice telling you it was improper steering, telling you that you were improperly incentivizing your buyer's agents.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to.
I was going to say, in summary, you can avoid what we've talked about today. These are not hard things. We can avoid that by not putting the compensation and not cheating the edges and putting it in a different field, in a different wording, in a different way. Offering compensation to a lawyer, having them sign off that they were told to talk to a buyer's lawyer, whether they do or not. These little things that you're able to do as a lawyer that will just help insulate and protect the situation for our sellers.
Right.
And everyone should be doing this, but we'll see how this shapes out. And it will be interesting to see, because I think some of the stuff we're talking about, I do believe that, California Association of Realtors, the National Association, they make good forms and they have smart lawyers. We may see some of these forms come out from them. I'm sure we will over time.
Part of me hopes that some lawyers will straighten out realtors so sellers aren't put at risk.
Right. Right now, it's the Wild West. I mean, the comments out there, maybe we'll make a video about that. Some of the comments that agents are saying are, I'd be very careful.
and so tone deaf. Oh my goodness. Yeah. All right. We've been congratulations and thank you to anyone who's watching all the way. I know. Wow. I know that this is important to some people, and hopefully we had some insights. But if you watch us all the way, I thank you for really caring. And we will endeavor to make our talks shorter, Phil.
Right.
But I mean, I tried to start with short. It's important.
This is good information to have out there. You can
it's important.
Stick around and come back to it.
Right. All right. So we will. Oh boy. For people that are interested in selling their home in Southern California, and eventually anywhere, because I see the importance of having the referral ready. So start with the realtors who are caring about you, and then if you can't sell your home, refer to an agent that's willing to offer compensation and publicize it. I mean, if that model's out there, at some point, I'm going to tell my sellers, go for it. I'll try to protect you. So you can start with flatfeeadvantage.com. It may be still at winnerscheck.com. I think I'm just going to have a contact form on there because I don't know where we're going to be saying. But if you're thinking of selling your home for a flat fee and you like us to do it in Southern California or help you find an agent that will do it properly, talk to Phil at Flat Fee. We'll have a form right there. Hey, contact us. And that's just going to start a conversation with Phil. And you saw how friendly Phil is. No obligation, because we're still trying to do what's right for you. And frankly, we're not planning to make a lot of money at this. We're doing it for the data. So if your house, if we don't think it's going to work for you right off the bat, we're going to tell you.
We'll tell you, absolutely.
We'll talk about your options, and we'll say, would you like us to try to protect you and refer you to a realtor who is willing to publish compensation on the MLS right now or anywhere else? I mean, for you, after talking with us, that might be the right model. We're not going to do that right now. There's no way I'm going to do that right now. I'm protecting. I mean, Phil's got assets. I've got assets. I mean, we have kids going to college, so we'd like to make money too. But we're not risking our assets to do something that the DOJ just told us is steering. But if we don't have any data, we'll revisit that in a few weeks, a few months. All right. So thanks, flatfeeadvantage.com, to talk to Phil. And again, thank you for watching. Anything else, Phil?
No, I think that's it. Thanks, John. We'll catch you on the next one.
All right. I'm going to get some water. We can talk on camera right after this, but I'm ending the recording.